Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Tanya Friedman, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Kinetics USA. We help hospitals, nursing homes, surgery centers, rehab facilities all over the US with the nursing shortage by bringing in internationally educated nurses. And we've been doing this for many years and brought through thousands of nurses from 60 countries all over the world. I have with me today my colleague, Denise Gavica Perez. Hi, Denise.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Hi, welcome everybody. This show is really a really important one for anybody who is even thinking of coming to the US, because I know as many international nurses think about it, the first thing they think of is, well, I'd love to go, but I don't really know how it works. How do I start? What is a green card? How is that different from an H-1 visa? What are the steps of the green card? So today we're going to break all of that down, and any nurse who's watching does not have to feel overwhelmed or stressed out. This is going to be hassle-free, and we're going to get straight to it now. So onwards and upwards, everyone. Okay, so Denise, let's get started. First of all, tell us a little bit about your background and about yourself.
Sure, absolutely, Tanya. So I have been practicing employment-based immigration for the past 20 years, including family-based, actually, and citizenship. And I have been working with Fortune 500 companies and entities from all over the United States, a lot of healthcare facilities, a lot of hospitals. And I currently am a partner at Ackerman. It's a law firm, a nationwide law firm. It's a global, it has a global practice as well, but I'm primarily part of the labor and employment group, managing immigration matters for foreign nationals and companies throughout the U.S.
Thank you, Denise. So you can hear Denise is an expert. I think she is one of the lawyers who's probably done more green cards for nurses than almost anybody else in the country. She really knows this process. So we are really honored and so grateful to you, Denise, for giving us this time. We know how busy you are. Right now, we're seeing an explosion of cases, an explosion of demand for international nurses in the US. So Denise is really, really busy. So we're really grateful for her time. And thank you for joining us, Denise.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Tanya.
Okay, and Denise and I, by the way, has worked together for many, many years and brought through thousands of nurses.
Yes.
We really know this process well. Okay, Denise, so let's get started.
Sure.
Tell us, what is a green card? And more specifically, what is an EB3 green card?
Okay, perfect. So a green card is U.S. permanent residence, basically. The reason why it's called a green card is because many, many years ago, the permanent resident card was green in color. But green card, immigrant visa, U.S. permanent residence are all the same. It's when someone wants to reside in the United States and work in the United States permanently. They want to remain in the U.S. permanently rather than short term. So whenever you hear the term green card, think of it as U.S. permanent residence, people who are residing here permanently, working here permanently, as opposed to temporary, which are the temporary visas, which we can discuss in a minute. But that's basically it.
Okay, so the word I'm hearing coming out all the time is permanently.
Yes.
Okay, so if you're a nurse who is sitting anywhere in the world right now and thinking of coming to America, this should be really interesting to you, because this means that you don't have to go home to your home country if you don't want to, because you will permanently be able to stay in the US.
Correct. Yes. There are different ways of obtaining permanent residence, either based on family or political asylum or special laws or employment. So when it comes to nurses, they fall under employment. They are basically sponsored by a U.S. employer, a hospital, a healthcare facility, and the hospital or healthcare facility behaves as a U.S. citizen spouse, for example. So they basically, the company is willing to sponsor a nurse to come to the U.S. to work permanently and on a full-time basis, and they complete paperwork in order to achieve that goal. And the nurse has to have the intent of joining the employer in the US to work permanently. So whenever we talk about permanent residence, it's not always based on family or special laws. In the cases of nurses and medical professionals and other professionals, it's based on employment. So you had asked about EB3. What does EB3 mean? EB stands for employment-based, EB. So whenever someone is applying for permanent residence based on employment, you will hear the term EB. And then EB3 is a specific preference category for nurses and other professionals that fall under a third preference category. Nurses are classified as what are called Schedule A workers. Because there's a shortage, the government makes an exception as far as the steps that are necessary in order for a nurse to come.
Denise, we seem to have lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's better. Yeah, sorry.
So the nurses fall under the EB3, employment-based, third preference category for purposes of obtaining U.S. permanent residence with an employer sponsor here, a hospital that's willing to sponsor them.
Okay, that was a great explanation of the EB3 and the green card, because I think it can be very confusing for many people. How does that differ to other visas like an H1 or an EB2 visa, and why aren't nurses eligible, or why wouldn't they come through on the H1 or the EB2?
Okay, great question. So if someone's physically in the U.S., someone from overseas, when they're physically in the U.S., they're going to fall under one of three categories. They're either going to be non-immigrants, which are temporary, people who come to visit for tourism, for example, or to study. They're here for a short period of time. So they're non-immigrants, they're temporary, they're not immigrants, they're not permanent. So those are the typical, that's a typical category when people first come to the US to visit for a short period of time. If they're remaining in the US, once they obtain permanent residence, then they fall under the second category, which is permanent resident, which means they're no longer here temporary. The H-1B and the TN and those types of non-immigrant temporary visas, again, are for a short period of time. So the H-1B is good for 3 years, and you can extend it for another 3 years. It's for a specialty occupation. The reason why the H-1B is not the ideal visa classification for nurses is because for an H-1B, the position must require a bachelor's degree, and not all nursing positions require a bachelor's degree. So that's one of the reasons why nurses are no longer, they used to. There were so many times in the past they would the companies would process H-1Bs because they did require a bachelor's degree, but that's not a requirement anymore. An associate's degree is sufficient, and therefore the H-1B is not an option. But for Canadian nurses, for example, they can come in under the TN, which is a temporary visa as well. It's a worker visa. Again, it's not permanent, but usually a nurse will come in on the TN temporarily and then eventually apply for U.S. permanent residence while they're here physically working under the TN.
Okay, so for everybody watching, that's a great explanation of all the different kinds of visas and why nurses are actually very fortunate, because there is a shortage. So they're Schedule A, so they will come in on the EB3 green card. I see we have a lot of people that are watching us from all over the world. So if you're just joining us now, welcome. I see we have Icelink, who has said interested, Portia, who said really interested. Well, we're excited that you're really interested. We've got a question here from Ashron, who is asking, are there options for Indian nurses? Denise, do you want to maybe touch on how it might be a little different for Indian nurses depending on their circumstances?
Absolutely. So it's very well known that a lot of foreign nationals from India bring talent to the U.S. There are a lot of engineers and physicians and all types of professionals that are from India. There's a very, very high demand. Historically, there has always been a very high demand for immigrant visas by Indian nationals. And so as a result of that, a lot of immigrant visas are demanded by the people from Indian countries, from India, excuse me. So when it comes time to apply for permanent residence, it's a little bit, it takes a little bit more time in order to get immigrant visas for nurses from India. again, because they're clumped together with other professionals. However, from our experience, there are a lot of nurses from India that have permanent residence cases that have been filed for them in the past, and they're able to preserve what's called their priority date, the date when a case was filed for them years ago, and they can use that year currently in order to move up ahead on the number of immigrant visas. So that it's called a priority date. A priority date is when a company files an immigrant visa petition on behalf of a nurse. And for those nurses from India that have been waiting for many years, because they have a priority date already set, it kind of evens out the playing field as far as whether their immigrant visa is available to them right now.
Okay. So that will give, I know we've got a lot of Indian nurses. I'm just looking at the chat that are asking questions about the priority date. So Pradeep, Sachin, I think there was another one that I just missed, but there are a lot of people asking about that. So hopefully that will give answers to those questions. So we have a question from Carlene. Carlene is asking, I'm a Canadian citizen planning to go to the US to work. Can you talk a little bit, Denise? I know you've touched on the TN visa, but can you answer maybe Carlene's question of, is it better for her to go on the can she go on the TN visa?
Absolutely. If there's a company that's willing to sponsor her, it's a pretty straightforward process because she's Canadian. She's visa exempt. She doesn't need a visa in her passport. So basically, the first thing she needs, the first thing any of the nurses need, is a company that's willing to sponsor them. So the company can provide Colleen with a letter confirming that they wish to hire her as a registered nurse. She would take that letter along with her academic credentials, her nursing license and her degrees, etc., and she would cross the border with the documentation. And as soon as she enters the U.S., she would be in TN status, which will allow her to work immediately upon arriving to the U.S. with the TN visa classification. So I think we need to backtrack a little bit here just to give an idea, give the group an idea of exactly how the process works.
Yes, and we're going to come to that, Denise.
Okay.
We've still got so many questions for you.
Okay, no problem.
I just see the feed going crazy. We have a lot of people with a lot of interest, and there's a lot of questions. And that's why we're so grateful to Denise for doing this show and giving of her time, because it's so confusing. It's so technical. There's so many questions, and hopefully we're going to give everybody who's watching a lot of clarity today. We have a question that was sent in, Denise, when we're just talking generally about the green card. What is the difference between the green card and U.S. citizenship?
Okay. Well, the green card is permanent residence, but it is not U.S. citizenship. In order to become a U.S. citizen, if you obtained residence, first you have to obtain permanent residence. And then after you obtain permanent residence, you can apply for U.S. citizenship. If your case is based on employment, then you would have to wait 5 years in order to apply for U.S. citizenship. And the main difference between a permanent resident and a U.S. citizen is that a U.S. citizen has a right to vote. The U.S. citizen can work for certain government agencies that a permanent resident can't. But basically, the main right that a person has with citizenship is that they have the right to vote.
Okay. So when Maria asked the question, can I sponsor my mom? I'm a green card holder. The answer is no, correct? She's going to have to wait until she's a citizen.
Right. In order to sponsor a family member for permanent residence, it has to be an immediate relative. It has to be either a spouse or a child under the age of 21. Okay. So in order to sponsor your mother, you would have to wait until you become a U.S. citizen, and then you're given a preferential treatment because of that status.
Okay. And just to share with everybody, I came from South Africa 21 years ago, so I'm an immigrant as well, and I think that's why we have such a passion for helping people who want to come to the U.S. I actually left South Africa on the 21 years ago and on the 4th of July, which I always thought was very significant. It was Independence Day, and it truly was my independence. And it really was the greatest thing I've ever done, but also not easy, and it had its challenges. But today I'm a proud citizen, I can say, and I am actually sponsoring my mom. And Denise is the lawyer who's helping me with that. So Maria, gonna have to wait a little bit, but hopefully you'll be able to sponsor your mom as well.
Yes.
Patricia asked, when I get the green card, what happens with my family?
Well, when you receive the green card, your spouse, if you're married, assuming you're married, your spouse will obtain permanent residence, the green card as well, and your children under the age of 21.
Okay. So the family can come with. So that's great news for Patricia and any other nurse who's coming through on the EB3 green card. And Paul has asked, this is a question we get a lot. How long does it take, Denise? If we were to start the process today for an EB3 green card, what is the timing right now? And obviously we know it's an estimate.
Well, there's a lot that goes into the process behind the scenes as far as putting the case together with the employer. Part of it is called, and we will talk about it in a little bit, a prevailing wage determination that we have to request from the Department of Labor. And typically that takes about 5 months. And then after we have the prevailing wage determination, we submit the case to immigration, and that takes about 15 days. So calculate about 6 months there. And then immigration notifies the National Visa Center, an organization that puts together the appointment at the U.S. consulate, and that could take another 2 months. So I would say altogether, for those of you that have a priority date current, it will take a little bit less than a year.
Okay, so there you heard it from the expert. Denise Gavica Perez has spoken about a year. And so I see Jamal is saying, I wish I can be in the USA. Jamal, you can. You're just going to have to follow the steps that we're going to go through in the next few minutes. We've got a lot of great questions coming through. Kati saying very informative. Shamsha is asking about the IELTS. So Shamsha, we're going to get to that question now. We have so many questions. I don't know where to go next. Okay, so last question, just generally about the green card. We have a question from Grace Ann that was sent to me earlier, and she's asking, are you allowed to get separate EB3 sponsorships from different hospitals at the same time? This is a bit of a tricky question. What will your answer be on that one, Denise?
Well, you can be sponsored by multiple employers, but ultimately you have to have the intent of joining one. You have to have the intent of working with them full time and permanently, and they have to have the intent of hiring you permanently. So if you are at the point of the process where you have multiple petitions approved, you have to select one because of the fact that intent is a key issue when it comes to permanent residence. You have to be, once you attend your interview, at the time of the interview, you're telling a U.S. government official that you intend to join Hospital A specifically, not multiple hospitals. But bottom line, you could have multiple sponsors and then select from the sponsors as to which one you would like to join permanently.
Okay. And, you know, Grace, and the one thing that I would just add, having been in recruitment for many, many years and brought through international nurses for many years, I think it's also important, you know, there's obviously the technical piece of it, as Denise has just explained to you, but I think there also is the ethical part of it, because it's very costly for an employer to spend money on your EB3 green card. And as Denise said, it's about intention. So I would just, you know, encourage you to only go with, you know, make your decision, ask questions. We're going to talk a little bit about that further in the show, but really intend to go into it in the same way as you would to any relationship, or it's like a marriage. You know, if the employer is paying for your green card, you want to show them that you are just as committed and dedicated and that you are solely going to be interested in them. So I think that's what I would just add from a recruitment perspective. Okay, Denise, we're going to move on now to the different processes, because they're two different green cards. Can you explain to us the difference between the consular process and the adjustment of status?
Sure. So there are two different paths to obtain permanent residence. And the path that will be selected depends on where the nurse is physically located. If the nurse is physically in the United States, the path is called an adjustment of status application, where the nurse asks that the government adjust their non-immigrant status to immigrant status. For example, the TN will be here temporarily in TN status. And if they are physically in the US and they are applying for permanent residence, they would ask the government to adjust them from a temporary TN non-immigrant status to an immigrant status. The second part of the process, or the second way of processing the permanent residence case, is consular processing, consular notification, consular processing. So for those who are overseas, instead of adjusting their status, because there's no status to adjust if they're not physically here, they attend an appointment at the U.S. consulate overseas. In both cases, the nurse will ultimately get permanent residence. It's just that in one case, they're handling the case physically here in the U.S., and in the other one, they're handling the case physically at the consulate.
Okay. All right. So if you are an international nurse and you are in the US, as Denise said, the adjustment of status process is going to be the pathway. But for today's show, we're going to be speaking more specifically about the consular process. Okay. So we've created a roadmap with the steps. This is a really important slide, everybody. Pay attention. Denise is going to take us through the different stages of the consular green card process, and she is going to just give us a very high-level overview. Today, we're going to talk about pre-filing, what happens at pre-filing, because now we know how nurses come in on the EB3 green card, and what's needed from a pre-filing stage. So Denise, do you want to maybe take us through just each of those steps and just give a very high-level summary of what they entail, and then we're going to talk a bit more about pre-filing.
Absolutely. So pre-filing, it starts off with, again, a hospital or healthcare facility that's willing to sponsor the nurse. And typically, the hospitals that have already been working with, especially the kinetics team, they've already started on the pre-filing steps. The first step requires that the employer request what's called a prevailing wage determination from the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor sets the wage for the specific location where the nurse will work. So for example, if the nurse will be working at a hospital in New York, then the Department of Labor will specify the exact salary, the minimum salary that's supposed to be paid to a nurse who's working specifically in within the county where the hospital is located. So it starts off with a prevailing wage request from the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor takes about 5 to 6 months to send that prevailing wage determination. And in the meantime, while the hospital waits for that determination from the Department of Labor, the hospital starts preparing the petition on behalf of the nurse. The petition entails, it's a petition that's filed with the the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services here in the U.S. The petition includes the nurse's credentials. It includes evidence that the hospital is financially viable, that it has the ability to pay the salary that's being offered to the nurse. It includes documentation to prove that the company is actually real, that it has a business location. So all of the paperwork is prepared while we wait for the prevailing wage determination. And once we have the prevailing wage determination, which we only need one, once we have the prevailing wage determination, it can be used on multiple cases. We include the prevailing wage determination with the petition, the nurse's supporting documentation, license, etc., credentials, and we file the case with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. 99% of the time, the hospitals will request that immigration render decision in 15 days. So they pay an additional cost in order to receive a decision in 15 days rather than 8 months. It could take 8 months without expedited requests. So assuming we already have the prevailing wage determination, the petition is prepared, letter of support, all of the supporting documentation from the nurse, the case is filed once we get that prevailing wage determination, and in 15 days or less, immigration will render a decision on the petition. And 99% of the time, it's an approval. So once the case is approved, Immigration will notify the National Visa Center. The National Visa Center, again, is the branch of the government that schedules the appointment at the U.S. consulate. So immigration will notify the National Visa Center that the petition has been approved. And within 1 to 2 months of that notification, the National Visa Center will contact the nurse in order for the nurse to start gathering their biographic documents and prepping, paying a fee bill and prepping for their interview. So those are behind the scenes. Those are the steps that occur. That's even though it's called pre-filing, I'm trying to take you a little bit more ahead so that you see how it gets from the prevailing wage determination to the point that the National Visa Center contacts the nurse to schedule them for an interview at the U.S. consulate.
Okay. And then we have Welcome to America, where everybody's doing their happy dance.
Yes.
Okay. I actually remember the day that I got my green card. It really, truly was one of the happiest days of my life. So that's what we want for all of you who are watching.
Yes.
Denise, so if we go back to the slide with the different stages of the green card, and I think you've gone through a great overall summary of the different stages. The pre-filing stage on the nurse's side. Let's talk a little bit about, and I see we've got a lot of questions coming in about nurses asking about the NCLEX, the CGF&S exam, the IELTS. So there's a lot of questions coming in about that. So we're going to share with you now what are the requirements from the nursing side that are important for that are vital for the pre-filing stage.
Absolutely. So we definitely need the nurse to have completed their nursing degree. So they have to have a nursing degree. They have to, at some point in time, complete the NCLEX. They don't have to complete it for purposes of filing the petition, but at some point in time, they have to complete NCLEX, and they have to have a visa screen by the time they go to their interview. But in the meantime, the documentation that we basically need in order to be able to file the petition is their academic credentials, their diploma, their biographic information, their passport information. They should all make sure that their passports are current, not wait until the very end to be updating their passports. They should all make sure that they're, one of the main issues that we have to address sometimes is that their birth certificates or their documents have the wrong names or need to be corrected. They should make sure to take care of all of that before they initiate a case, just to get the ball rolling, so that when it comes time to go to their interview or when it comes time to file their case, they already have everything in order. But bottom line, if for purposes of filing the petition, we need them to have their nursing degree. We need them to be working towards their NCLEX. Again, you don't need the NCLEX to file, but we need you to work toward it. And we need them to be working towards their visa screen.
Okay, so that gives everybody, I think, a very clear idea of what is required from the nursing side. And I want to just go through a few questions that I can see in the chat and that I've received before. I think to the Kinetics team, let's put that slide back up on the requirements so that everyone can just see that and we can go through that in a little bit more detail, because here's where a lot of nurses get very confused. So as Denise said, of course, you need to be an RN. You need to be a registered nurse. You need to have your qualification from your home country, and you need to have got your license in your home country. Now, in terms of the NCLEX or the CGF&S exam, Denise, can you talk a little bit about that? Why do we have either or? And what is
the nurse has to show that they're proficient in English, that they're able to communicate.
Sorry, not the English, the NCLEX or the CGF&S. Okay. Yeah.
Well, basically, I mean, by the time that the case comes to Kinetics is the one that I defer to when it comes to licensing and the credentialing, but the nurse needs the credentials at some point in time, right before they are issued an immigrant visa. At the very tail end of the process, they're going to need the visa screen, the CGF&S visa screen. So I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question, Tanya, but basically it's a requirement that they need the licensing.
Correct. Yeah, 100%. So for anybody watching, listen up. This is really important. this is really, if you're a registered nurse and you have your license abroad, your first step is going to be to take the NCLEX exam. The NCLEX is the nursing board exam that all nurses that live and work in the US have to pass. It's not an easy exam. And in fact, I want to let everybody know that Kinetics have a scholarship right now where we are selecting nurses. This is only for selected nurses that are eligible for our scholarship, and there'll be more details to come. So please check out our website and we'll have more details about the NCLEX scholarship. But the first step for any nurse wanting to come here is to pass the NCLEX exam. If you have already passed the NCLEX exam, please apply to Kinetics USA /application and we'd.com, sorry, and /application, and we'd be very happy to speak to you about the literally almost thousands of jobs that we have right now throughout the US. There might be some nurses who have taken the CGF&S exam. And just to explain to everybody, the CGF&S exam is an exam, well, let's put it this way. Many years ago, you could only write the NCLEX exam in the US. So many international nurses would take the CGF&S exam, which is kind of like a precursor to the NCLEX, and they would take that in their home country just to see if they think they're going to be able to pass the NCLEX. If they pass, fly to the US and would take the NCLEX here. So technically, you can apply for an EB3 green card with either the NCLEX or the CGF&S exam. These days, because there are NCLEX centers all over the US, all over the world, in different locations, most people will not write the CGF&S exam and will go straight to the NCLEX. So the NCLEX is really your first step. As Denise said, you need to pass, if you are not trained in English, you need to pass the English proficiency exam. And then the visa screen is the document that comes from the CGF&S, as Denise said. And this is a document that is required in order to get the EB3 green card. So we're going to be providing more information on those steps, but that just kind of gives you an overview. Okay. Denise, for a nurse that is at the pre-filing stage, what do they need to know at that pre-filing stage? What would you say are the insider tips? We actually have a few insider tips. I think let's share that slide and I can go through that.
Sure. I mean, the main tip is if you are in the process of selecting a sponsor, check with them and see if they've already submitted the prevailing wage request, because that's truly what takes the longest in the process. So if the hospital has already initiated that part of the process, and you should ask them and they can share that information with you, then you'll know how much time it'll take before the petition is filed. So if you are working with a hospital that has a prevailing wage request that has been pending for 3 months, then you know that the maximum it will take is another 3 months before a petition can be filed on your behalf. So the tip is make sure that you ask. You have the right to ask, and they will answer your questions. A lot of the hospitals are so helpful, and they want to be as transparent as possible with you and support you. So definitely ask if they have a prevailing wage determination request pending with the Department of Labor.
Okay, a very, very, very important tip. Many nurses get very frustrated with the timing, and if you ask that question, does the hospital have the prevailing wage and posting done? That will tell you if they can file immediately or if there's going to be a long wait before they can file. And as Denise said, you have the right to ask that question. We're going to share with you some insider tips about how to choose an employer or recruitment agency. And really the first thing that I would say is ask the employer or the recruitment agency questions. Don't be shy to ask. Many international nurses feel very nervous about asking and feel maybe it comes across as rude, or they don't have the right to ask questions. This is not so. It's very important for you to ask questions. And the first question to ask the employer, as Denise said, is, have you already completed the prevailing wage and posting stage, which is the stages that come at that pre-filing stage from the employer perspective. Another thing that I think is an important insider tip is to check the reviews and ask for recommendations before working with the recruitment agency, and really browse the social media of that company, whether it's a hospital or recruitment agency, and you'll find a lot of information from people who've gone through their process. You also need to make sure, if you are living and working in the Philippines, that the company that you are working with is registered or accredited with the POEA. And another insider tip, which is really important, is you need to confirm if the recruitment agency that you're working with is a member of the AAIHR, as well as the CGF&S Alliance for Ethical Recruitment. These are important organizations that vet employment recruitment agencies, and you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who has been accredited by either the AAIHR or the CGF&S Alliance, and Kinetics has both. So if you have the NCLEX, please apply to us now. Okay, so final information about the pre-filing stage, Denise. So we spoke about the prevailing wage and the posting. What are the insider tips? And you went through detail about this prevailing wage and what the posting is. What does the nurse need to do? What are the insider tips from the nurse's perspective in terms of prevailing wage and the posting? And
yes, we didn't exactly cover the posting, so I'm going to touch upon it for a minute.
Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you, Denise. Thank you.
No, of course. So while the prevailing wage is being processed by the Department of Labor, the hospital has to, even though there's a shortage, they have to still put on notice employees that there's a position available, for a nursing position available. So the posting notice is just a simple document that's posted at a public area within the hospital, informing the staff, employees, that there's a registered nurse position available. It's a mandatory. It's mandated by regulations. It's a posting notice that simply is letting the employees know that there's a position available, and it has to be posted for 10 business days, and then it has to be up for another 30 days. So those are behind the scenes documents that you really don't have to do anything about that. That's not your responsibility. It's part of what's included in the petition that's filed with the service center. But the posting notice is just pretty much a document serving as evidence that the company has made an effort to try to find a U.S. worker. Again, because there's a shortage of the Schedule A worker, it really doesn't impact one way or another, but it's mandatory. And that's part of what's prepared in order to make sure that when the prevailing wage arrives, that we don't waste any time and we have everything in order. So, so while you're waiting for the prevailing wage determination, if it hasn't been issued, and for the posting to be completed, just pretty much your responsibility is to provide your credentials, your documents. You focus on your documents. The company will focus on everything else that we've been discussing. It's not your responsibility to post a notice. That's not the nurse's, it's not within your reach, actually. But those are documents that are already preset. And by the time the prevailing wage comes in, the case is ready to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Denise, we got a question from Anne, who asked, can a nurse look up the prevailing wage themselves?
Well, online, you will find there's a source that has 4-level wages for every single occupation you can think of, ranging from CEOs, CFOs, doctors, all types of occupations. There's a website that has 4-level wages. That source is what the Department of Labor relies on in order to select the appropriate wage level. So the more senior the responsibilities, let's say that if the nurse will have some supervisory responsibilities, it all depends on the job description that the employer provides to the Department of Labor when we request a prevailing wage. The government will select the level wage, either level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4. Level 4 is for very advanced senior level managerial nurses. Typically, the Department of Labor will come back with a level 1 or level 2 wage, which anyone can find online, but it's not official until the Department of Labor issues its official prevailing wage determination. So we could look at it, we could say, oh, we believe that this is the appropriate wage, but our conclusions have no validity, no weight. What matters is the determination made by the Department of Labor. And so bottom line, yes, someone can go online, look at the wages, but ultimately the wage will be selected by the Department of Labor, not by the nurse and not by the hospital.
Okay. So, Anne, you can look at it, but as Denise said, it really needs to come from the Department of Labor. CJ has a question. CJ is asking, can you explain how different locations or counties have different prevailing wages?
Well, it's all based on the standard of living. It's all based on the city. If it's in a rural area versus a more commercial area, it's based on just the location, and that's why you have those 4-level wages. And the Department of Labor looks up the specific county where the job site is located, and they select the appropriate wage. But there's so many wages. There's no way that we could know off the top of our head because there's so many different cities and counties, etc.
And that's something that's really interesting and can be many nurses don't realize is that there are just that the US is so big that it's not like every nurse gets the same wage.
No.
You can find 2 hospitals that are not that far from each other where nurses get different wages.
Well, that's the Department of Labor's responsibility to make sure that the appropriate wage is being offered. That's the whole purpose of the prevailing wage determination to begin with. So they take 5 months in order to select the appropriate wage so that foreign nationals are not underpaid, so that they're paid at least the appropriate wage for those who are working within a specific location. So, for example, I live in Miami, and if I was going to work as a registered nurse at Baptist Hospital here in Miami, the government would go through the minimum requirements that Baptist Hospital would submit to them. They would look up the specific county, they being the Department of Labor, and the Department of Labor would say, well, based on where she's working or where she intends to work, this is the appropriate salary level 2. Okay, and then they come back and they send the employer an official determination that's stamped, endorsed by the Department of Labor. It cannot be manipulated. It cannot be prepared by anyone else. It's an official determination that has a code attached to it. And then that way, at least the nurse knows that they're getting the correct salary, that they're being offered the right wage. An employer cannot offer a wage below the prevailing wage. So if in Miami, the Department of Labor comes back with a prevailing wage of, let's say, I don't know, $30 an hour, and they offer me $35 an hour, then they being the employer, then it's perfectly aligned with the prevailing wage determination issued by the Department of Labor. However, if they offer me $22 an hour and the prevailing wage comes back at $30, then they're not in compliance. The hospital will not be able to file a petition on my behalf.
Okay, so really important for any international nurse to understand it. But as Denise said, that piece of it, the prevailing wage and posting, is just for you to know what it is, understand how it works. But really, it's more just from the timing perspective, because the question that an international nurse might ask is, have you already done that? Because that means that we can move to the next stage, which is the filing.
Correct.
So to sum up some insider tips on the prevailing wage and posting side, as Denise had gone through. And we have a slide that we're going to be pulling up now, which is about, just in terms of the prevailing wage and posting. So just in summary, as Denise said, you are perfectly entitled to ask if the US employer has completed the prevailing wage and posting requirements. And if they have, that means that we can immediately move on to the second stage, which is the filing of the immigrant petition. The other thing that an international nurse can do at this stage of the pre-filing is to start to prepare your documents for the next stage when we're going to file the immigrant petition. And so this is a time to start doing that and collecting and collating documents. One thing to mention, neither the employer or the agency should ever ask you to pay any recruitment fees at the prevailing or posting stage or anywhere throughout the process. You want to make sure at this pre-filing stage that you've obtained a written contract before your case is filed. And the last thing, as Denise said, is employers are required to pay the RNs either the prevailing wage, which comes from the Department of Labor, or the actual wage, whichever is higher. So that really is a sum up of everything that a nurse needs to know, all the insider tips on this pre-filing stage, which is the prevailing wage and posting. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the pre-filing stage. In the last few minutes, I'm just going to we've got so many questions. I'm like, I want to try and get through everybody's question and give everybody a chance. So I'm just going to get through as many as we can in the last 8 minutes of the session. So Ajit has asked, is the birth certificate mandatory for a green card?
Yes, the birth certificate is mandatory.
Olo Wakeri, and I hope I've got your name right, is asked, can non-NCLEX passes apply? So as we've learned today, no, for the EB3 green card, they cannot apply. But Denise, do you want to maybe touch on the nurse aid program? Because at Kinetics, we also have a nurse aid program. And if you're an RN, you might be eligible for that. And Denise, maybe you can talk just very briefly about how that green card process is a little different.
Okay. Well, the nurse aid position is not a registered nurse position. It's not a Schedule A worker position. So it requires an additional step in the process. I don't know if you recall at the beginning of this discussion, I explained how there's a shortage of nurses, Schedule A workers. So because of that, the Department of Labor does not impose a requirement of having to go through a rigorous labor certification process. Where you have to take a few more steps than just posting. You have to advertise a position in 2 Sunday ads. There are lots of recruitment efforts that have to be completed for nurse aides. They're different from Schedule A workers where there's no need to go through a rigorous recruitment process. So for a nurse aide, we would have to take an additional step and prepare what's called a labor certification, which has to be filed with the Department of Labor. And prior to filing that labor certification, the company would have to take certain steps, advertising the position to try to find a U.S. worker.
Okay, so Olowokeri, more to follow on the nurse aid program, but I think Denise has given you a very nice summary of how that green card process is a little different if you have not yet passed the NCLEX and you're on RN in your home country. Colleen, we covered that question about the Canadian citizens who will come in on the TN visa, and Colleen, please feel free to apply to our website. We have a question from Sashi. Sashi is asking, okay, this is a question for the end. I'm a UK nurse currently waiting for CGFNS to see if I'm eligible to sit the NCLEX. Do you sponsor nurses or do we need a hospital employer? If you have had to have a hospital employer, then are we obligated to work with them for the duration of the green card? So Sashi, in answer to your question, I'm glad that you are going to be taking the NCLEX soon, and you're welcome to also follow up about our NCLEX scholarship. But Kinetics offer direct hire employment. So we are not a staffing company. We don't sponsor you and you will work directly for Kinetics. What we do is direct hire, which is where the employer, the hospital, the nursing home, the surgery center, rehab facility will be your employer and your sponsor. And Kinetics is the consultant that helps both you and the employer with the process. And when you talk about the duration of the green card, as Denise said, the duration of the green card is permanent. So it is permanent residency.
Tanya, may I interject a second?
Yes.
A lot of times there is confusion because the card itself is issued for 10 years. So I've had a lot of clients ask me, does that mean that I'm a permanent resident only for 10 years? And the answer is no. It's just a form of evidence of your permanent resident status. So you have a passport for example, that expires, that doesn't mean that you're no longer a citizen of your country because a passport expires. The same thing applies to the permanent resident card. It has an expiration date, but that doesn't mean that the person stops, that they lose their permanent residence after 10 years. They don't. It's just a form of evidence of their permanent resident status.
Okay, so that's great clarification. Thank you, Denise.
With pleasure.
Saim is asking an interesting question. Can we apply, and I assume therefore the green card, without the IELTS, planning to take it in 6 months? Denise, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that? Can we apply for the I-140 without the IELTS? And at what stage does the nurse definitely have to have the IELTS?
Yes, absolutely. We can apply for the I-140 without the IELTS and without the visa screen. And then toward the end of the process, when you're already at the National Visa Center stage, you want to make sure that you have all of that in order.
Correct. So I would definitely say, Saim, it's really important to, if you're planning to take it in the next 6 months, I know, and this is just human nature, we kind of like, today is another day, everybody's busy and there's a lot going on for nurses. But I really would suggest you have a sense of urgency with the IELTS. Even though we technically can file for the I-140 without it, you have to have the IELTS if you were not trained in English. So, please get on that IELTS process. Yazan is asking, can I change from an F1 visa? And for those of you watching, the F1 is the student visa?
Yes. An F1 is a student visa. And yes, you could change. That's when you will request that the government adjust your status from non-immigrant F1 temporary status to immigrant status. So you'll be here on your F1, probably working under the optional practical training. And while you're working under optional practical training, a permanent residence process case will be pending. The petition will be filed, ultimately approved, and you will simultaneously, concurrently file an adjustment of status application, asking that your status be adjusted from non-immigrant to immigrant. So adjustment, I want to be clear, is different from change. Change is if you're asking to switch your F1 to an H, or your F1 to a TN, or your F1 to another visa classification. The word is change. If you're asking for permanent residence, you're asking to be adjusted from a non-immigrant to an immigrant.
Okay, thank you for that, Denise. The last question is from Irene. Irene is asking, in your one data, I'm not sure what that is, but are there still a lot of employers hiring nurses? Denise, what are you seeing? And then I can share what we're seeing.
Yes. Absolutely. Many employers are hiring nurses, and Kinetics is the right team to work with. They work with so many hospitals and healthcare facilities. And I want to add, they're amazing to work with. They're very professional. I would never work with a team that's not professional, ethical, perfect. They're perfect. They work really, really well. And they've brought so many nurses that have secure jobs with reputable hospitals nationwide. So I definitely want to make sure that everyone on this in this group understands that the quality of the hospitals and healthcare facilities that Kinetics works with is top of the line.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Denise. And I would say ditto to you, because anyone who's lucky enough to have Denise as their lawyer is truly very fortunate. She does a phenomenal job and is also really very professional, extremely hands-on, very courteous, very detailed orientated, and has enormous success. So really, thank you for your partnership.
Thank you.
I just want to say we are not perfect. We try. We try. This is a complicated process. But I think if anybody is watching today and is wondering if this is going to be an opportunity that could really work for them, in answer to Irene's question, the answer, as Denise said, is yes. There are more positions right now for international nurses than we have ever seen. Kinetics have been doing this. Kinetics have been doing this for many, many years. We have never seen such a demand for international nurses. There are hospitals, nursing homes, surgery centers, rehab facilities all over the US that are now hiring for international nurses. So there's a lot of choice. As I said, if you are just joining, Kinetics are not a staffing company. We don't employ and hire nurses ourselves. We are direct hire, which means you are employed by the hospital or the nursing home directly and sponsored by them. And the huge advantage to you of that is that you will get paid the same as an American nurse. So there are a lot of advantages, but that's the biggest advantage to you. And you also have choice. If you have family in California, we can find you an employer in California. If you have always wanted to be in New York City, we can help you with an opportunity in New York City. So wherever you want to be, we have opportunities. That was such a great discussion. I want to thank everybody who's joining us. I know there are a lot more questions in the chat, and our team will be going into the chat after this session, and we'll be answering as many questions as possible. And we thank Denise for her time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.